conservative whiz kid Ben Shapiro was recently on the BBC, and he was getting interviewed by a conservative host on the BBC. I think that's an important bit of information to give you context into how disastrously this went for Ben Shapiro, who is also conservative. Now, without further ado, let's take a look at how this interview went down.
Some of the ideas that are popular in your side of politics would seem to take us back to the Dark Ages, Georgia, new abortion laws, which you are much in favor of, that a woman who miscarries could get 30 years. A Georgian woman who travels to another state for an abortion procedure could get 10 years. These are extreme hard policies.
Well, okay, a couple of things. One, I'm not sure. I mean, frankly, I don't know whether are you an objective journalist or are you an opinion journalist?
I'm a journalist that asks questions.
Okay, so you're a supposedly objective journalist calling policies with which you disagree barbaric and suggesting only one side of the political aisle has ideas. So I just want to point out that I wish you would at least be honest in your own biases.
Mr. Shapiro, I know that broadcasting in America is now so polarized that on one program you only have the left and another one you just have the right. My job is to question those who have strong views and put an alternative to them. If you were an anti-abortion person, I would be putting pro-abortion questions to you. But you are
really would you call the pro-choice position?
So why don't you just answer my question,
sir? I'm happy to answer your question. Please answer this one. Would you suggest that a late-term abortion is brutal?
I'm not taking a view on this issue.
I'm
asking you the questions.
Sir, you just suggested the pro-life position is inherently brutal and terrible, so I'm asking you, as an objective journalist, would you ask the same question to a pro-choice advocate by calling their position brutal and horrible?
What I'm asking you is that why is it that a bill banning abortions after a woman has been pregnant for 6 weeks is not a return to the Dark Ages? What's your answer?
My answer is something called science. Human life exists at conception. It ought to be protected.
Okay. It almost looks like he got triggered there.
He totally did. Throughout the interview, and you're going to see more video of that in just a minute.
Yeah, and at the end, it's fun. He walks out, okay? So we'll
no, he doesn't. Whoa. He doesn't. He's just like, it's over. It's over. Please cut. Like, that's the best part of the whole thing is that he can't walk out. He just sort of stands there and he's waiting for them to. And guys, have you ever heard a wedgie like speak? Because like Ben Shapiro sounds like if a wedgie were like anthropomorphized and came to life, that's Ben Shapiro, and also like someone who's like empathy balls haven't dropped yet, you know, just sort of like the high. Yeah, that's Ben Shapiro.
Okay, so he says, I'm happy to answer your questions, but doesn't seem happy to be answering his questions. In fact, so much so that he walks out at the end. But on the issue of abortion, it is certainly returning to old times. And a lot of people do believe that it is Dark Ages. And so, but to me, the most relevant part of this first part is Shapiro crying about how you have to give an unfair advantage to my position by calling it even. No, he doesn't. He's asking you questions, and your job in that context is to answer them. And so if you don't frame things in a way that is pleasing to conservatives, they will definitely cry. That's their number one go-to trick here.
So I read an op-ed in the Washington Examiner, which is a right-wing outlet. And the title of the op-ed was "In Defense of This Interview," right? And the point of view was, look, the interview style from some of the hosts from BBC is very different from what you would expect from American news anchors, because their whole point is to stay calm and kind of get under your skin. And it appears that's exactly what happened. And what he was asking was, I think, okay to ask, because again, you're having someone, like your job as a journalist or as a news host isn't to just simply ask simple questions and play patty cakes with the person you're having the interview with. It's to ask the hard questions. And so if you juxtapose the way he interviewed Ben Shapiro to the way that he's interviewed others from the left, you would see very similar treatment, which is why this host, what was his name again?
Andrew Neil.
Yeah, Andrew Neil. he's not coming from a liberal perspective. In fact, if you look at his personal politics, he is not liberal at all. He's just coming at it from the contrarian perspective, which I think makes the interview way more interesting.
Yeah. He's the publisher of a conservative outlet, so he's definitely conservative.
Yeah. Rupert Murdoch, the God King of Republican and far right-wing political media in the world. He owns News Corporation, which was the parent company of Fox for a while. He personally made Andrew Neil the editor for one of his top newspapers in the 90s. At that same time, when he was an editor, by the way, he started smearing, at the time he was an editor, he allowed these smears saying that HIV didn't cause AIDS to be printed in his magazine.
Wow.
He was one of the Tories, the conservatives in England, who, when Tony Blair and George W. Bush were getting ready for the war in Iraq, he said that, yeah, the lead up to the war in Iraq was very well executed. It was well done, it was masterful. Andrew Neil.
That's the guy that Ben Shapiro just called a liberal because he asked him a tough question.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is unacceptable. Ben demands that you ask him softball questions, which the American media complies with, and then calls him, all sorts of positive words. The New York Times can't stop raving about Ben Shapiro. Oh my God, it's a right winger who talks in complete sentences.
The cool kid's philosopher is what they'll say.
Right.
Philosopher, please.
So we're just getting started. We have more video from this interview. Let's take a look.
My question to you, you purport to be an objective journalist. BBC purports to be an objective down the middle network. It obviously is not, it never has been, and you as a journalist are proceeding to call one side of the political aisle ignorant, barbaric, and sending us back to the dark ages. Why don't you just say that you're on the left? Is this so hard for you? Why can't you just be honest?
Mr.
Seriously,
Shapiro,
it's a serious question.
Mr. Shapiro, if you only knew how ridiculous that statement is, you wouldn't have said it. So let's move on. Would you vote for Mr.
I think it's pretty evident from your own questions exactly what you are, sir.
Trump?
Oh, it's so
Brilliant.
good. So good.
I literally love in that he tries to say, I'm just repeating to you exactly what you said, sir. Obviously, you're a leftist. I just told you, I just explained. This guy was in the tank for Tony Blair. He was considered to be a Thatcherite in the right-wing press. He's currently on the board of The Spectator, which is considered to be one of Britain's right-leaning publications.
If you only knew how me and Mrs. Thatcher got at it when she was in power.
Yeah.
Well, if you only knew how I have a shrine to Mrs. Thatcher, you wouldn't have said that. Sorry, I don't really know what accent I'm going there.
Yeah, I think you were Scottish, and I'm not sure he is.
I think he's a little Scottish in there.
He's got a little bit of that Midlands
He's got
ambiguous.
I hear it too. I think, look, it's funny because Ben Shapiro is always painted as this genius of debate, right? And it happens over and over again because in America, it's easy to pull the wool over people's eyes by claiming well, look at this person. He speaks quickly. He speaks with conviction, so he knows what he's talking about. He destroyed in that debate. But if you ever listen to the substance of what he's saying, he either doesn't make sense or he says things that just are demonstrably untrue, like arguing that money in politics doesn't corrupt politicians. That is absurd. That was one of the claims that he made during his debate with Cenk. But one thing that I think a master debate, someone who's really good at debate.
They frown upon that, Anna.
Yeah, Ben's not a fan of that, at least not until marriage.
You know exactly who you're about to talk to, right? So you need to obsessively study the person you're gonna debate, obsessively study the person that you're about to have an interview with because you wanna know where they're coming from. And if he had known, if he had taken a second to figure out who this host is and what his politics are, then he wouldn't have made that stupid claim that this guy is somehow a leftist.
Well, this is the thing about this interview that I love is that you can see when he's being introduced, he's like, Ben Shapiro has 5 million followers, whatever. He's listing all his stats, and Shapiro's got his little wedgie face, he's little, they love me, and he's getting all excited, right? And then when he starts to ask him, hey, do you support this really retrograde abortion bill? Tell me about that. And he's like, he gets really upset that suddenly what he thought was gonna be a fawning book review, just tell me about your thoughts on Western civilization, suddenly turns into a little bit of pushback.
Right.
He freaks out and he's like, crap, I didn't actually do any research about this guy who's interviewing me. I'm totally unprepared, which actually was very revealing that in fact, your God is really quite stupid and unprepared. I saw him debate you, Cenk, at Politicon, and I think in other instances, he did an okay job because he had prepared. But off the cuff, he actually doesn't have anything prepared. He's just there to dunk on libs. And
there's a little bit of a Sarah Palin-esque quality to it because Sarah Palin, when she was going to debate Joe Biden, knew that she couldn't answer the question, so she prepared ahead of time talking points on issues.
Yeah.
And Ben does that. So if you're gonna ask about healthcare or you're gonna ask about different issues, he goes to a standard attack talking points.
Yes.
And now again, as Anna pointed out, they don't have to make sense. Isn't it true that when politicians take millions of dollars for that they never do favors for the people that they took the millions of dollars from? You're like, no, that's not remotely true. That's a preposterous statement, right?
Yeah.
But he's prepared it. He doesn't have a plan B, and so he gets exposed here. But I actually think this is way more damning of the American media than it is of Ben Shapiro.
Yeah, 100%.
So when he cries the first time, that usually works. That's a bullying tactic. And he's like, I don't get it. When I do this to the New York Times, they write fawning pieces about me.
I thought this was gonna be like a Dave Rubin interview. I thought we were just gonna talk about ideas. What happened?
Yeah. Like when he says to Dave Rubin asks him, I mean, you'd bake me a cake, right? Even though I'm gay. And he's like, no, I wouldn't. Dave goes, yes, sir, absolutely, sir, right? And that's what he's used to. So when they have actual journalists in the UK, he's like, I did not see this coming.
Yeah.
Yes. So we have more. Let's take a look at the next video.
Haven't you all just really coarsened public discourse in America and exacerbated its divisions?
You know, it's kind of odd to be hearing about me coarsening public discourse when you call policies you disagree with brutal and bringing us back to the Dark Ages, sir.
The point, I don't want to return to it, but the point was to put a position for you to reply to it. And I thought we'd covered that.
That's.
Well, I'll put some of the points too, because on your videos,
characterization of issues is part of the problem in the coarsening of public debate.
Well, maybe it's also part of your problem too, because we have from your YouTube videos, Ben Shapiro destroys the abortion argument. Ben Shapiro destroys transgenderism and abortion. Is that not a kind of coarse public discourse?
Well, are those videos labeled by me?
I have no idea. But
why are you picking out? Why are you? I have a question. Why are you picking out random YouTube videos put up by people who are not me?
Are you
and then attributing the titles to me?
So let's go ahead and look at those random YouTube videos for a second, because we have screenshots from Ben Shapiro's YouTube channel and also screenshots from the Daily Wire YouTube channel. Daily Wire is what Ben Shapiro founded. So let's go to graphic 30. Oh, would you look at that? Ben Shapiro destroys Piers Morgan on gun control. Ben Shapiro destroys transgenderism and pro-abortion arguments. Ben Shapiro destroys Karl Marx in 60 seconds. Again, these are all from Ben Shapiro's.
Smacks down, crushes.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's also a tactic. You don't have to win a debate if afterwards you just keep saying destroys over and over and over again, and you get either paid people or your trolls and bots to go and say it. So did he actually destroy Karl Marx? My guess is no. Okay, and so, but that's a tactic that they use online. And by the way, if you're wondering why Andrew Neil is asking about the tone, et cetera, because the point of Shapiro's new book is that the country has become too angry. So that's why Neil is pressing on that point, saying, aren't you contributing to that? And then he angrily responds, no, it's your fault, you're the one who's angry. Irony.
Right, I love that we're getting on this topic, Cenk, about Ben Shapiro's debate styles and his tactics, because that's not often like in the forefront when we're talking about Shapiro. So I went to Berkeley back when he tried to turn my school into his playground for free speech in order to raise his speaking fees, essentially. And it's very clear what his tactics are. One thing he did in that interview several times, he reframed Neil's words so that Ben Shapiro could better turn it into an argument. So you'll notice if you watch the full thing, and believe me, I did because I'm a maniac. Andrew Neil never says like that his beliefs are barbaric or ignorant, but Shapiro, the only thing that saved him when he was a kid getting swirlies constantly, the only thing that made him feel like an alpha was speech and debate. And so anytime he's on defense mode, he will turn it into a speech and debate situation where he goes, oh, did you really say this? Are you saying this? But it looks ridiculous because, dude, you're being interviewed for your book. This is a press tour. Like, someone just let this happen. It's totally fine. But no, Shapiro's already in this mode where he's losing, and so he's on the defense. But it's so good to watch.
Let's take a look at the next video.
I'm simply trying to point out some of the things you've said that seem to me to help to stoke that anger. For example, you said Israelis like to build. Arabs like to bomb crap and live in open sewage.
Well, as I say in an article entitled, here's a list of all the giant, bad, dumb things I've ever said.
Was that dumb?
What? yes, that's a dumb tweet. And not only, but it is also important to mention that the next few tweets clarify that that tweet is specifically referring to the Hamas leadership, which, by the way, a BBC I've seen is relatively reticent to condemn.
No, actually, it wasn't. What you went on to do and say, you are correct about the slur on Arabs. It's not all Arabs that want to live in open sewage and blow things up. It's just Palestinians. You went on to say.
No, it says the ones who take sides against Israel in the Israel-Palestinian conflict.
Population is rotten to the core, you went on to say. Not Hamas, the Palestinian Arab population.
I say that by poll numbers, they elected Hamas. They elected Hamas. They educate their children in school that Israel should be obliterated, sir.
I guess.
If you want to read, honestly, this is a giant waste of time in the sense that the entire interview is designed for you to shout slogans or old things that I've said at me. I don't see how this forwards the debate. You talk about undermining the public discourse. It seems to me that simply going through and finding lone things that sound bad out of context and then hitting people with them is a way for you to make a quick buck on BBC off the fact that I'm popular and no one has ever heard of you.
There are not many bucks to be made on the BBC, unlike American broadcasting, Mr. Shapiro.
I love that response. Okay, and the idea of Ben Shapiro accusing someone else of doing things to make a quick buck is hilarious. And Dan, I would like you to please refer to graphic 29, which is the Ben Shapiro tweet in question. Can you read that to us?
Yeah, so Ben Shapiro is saying that, oh no, I didn't say that about Palestinians. You're mischaracterizing my quote. Well, graphic 29 says, apologies, you're correct regarding the slur about Arabs. He was apologizing about the Arabs live in sewage tweet. Not all Arabs live in open sewage and blowing things up, just pals, Palestinians, and their allies. So no, not all Arabs. I'm not being prejudiced towards all Arabs. I'm just being prejudiced towards all Palestinians, which is totally fine and totally okay.
You're just saying that, Dan, because I'm popular and like no one's ever heard of you or like the BBC or whatever.
You literally said that in the middle of the interview.
I've heard of the ABCs. What about the BBCs? That's gross.
I'm popular and no one has ever heard of you.
Can I say one sentence just for posterity? Ben Shapiro got cucked by the BBC.
Okay, so look, I'd seen the open sewage line, and I couldn't believe he said that, but I don't know why I couldn't believe it. He said a lot of terrible things, but I had not seen the other things that Andrew Neil quoted, and so I went back and looked it up. It's true, he wrote, Ben Shapiro did, the Palestinian Arab population is rotten to the core. So it was not, and he said the problem runs deeper than a few figureheads. So he wasn't talking about their leaders, he was talking about all Palestinian Arabs. He went on to say, they are as responsible for their government's longstanding evil as the Germans were for the Nazis. Now, if I had said, or anybody had said, Netanyahu brazenly kills civilians during the wars that they have, and the entire international community agrees with that, and those are war crimes. So since Israel voted for Netanyahu, I guess they are just as responsible for murdering civilians and are like the Nazis. I'm pretty sure Ben Shapiro's head would explode and would say, how dare you? How dare you insult Jews or anyone in Israel? But Palestinians live in open sewage, are rotten to their core, and are evil like Nazis. But bigotry against Palestinians apparently is acceptable in Ben Shapiro's world, so much so that if you challenge him on it, he's like, no, you're quoting me correctly, and that's just not fair. I tell the New York Times to not quote me correctly, and they listen, because the right wing dominates the American media. We tell them to shut up and do as we tell them, and they listen to us. Why won't the BBC listen to us and bow their heads and stop correctly quoting us?
And I also think that, Cenk, what you're talking about, just to me, is one of the things that truly bothers me about Shapiro is that he uses his Judaism as this cudgel, but it's such a specific type of Zionist Judaism that has no room, that completely conflates the state of Israel with Judaism, which it should not be conflated with, and conflates Judaism with white Jews. He's never apparently heard of Arab Jews, or definitely not a Jew of color, right? No one's ever heard of that, right? That doesn't fit within his very white supremacist and super white nationalist perspective of not just Israel, but the United States. But he is, no, he's a Jew, therefore he can't be racist. He's a Jew, therefore he can't be bigoted against anyone.
Ironically though, he will turn on other Jews and say terrible things about them. He said that if you voted for Obama, you're not a real Jew. You're a Jew in name only.
Right.
So I guess somebody made him Jew king, and he gets to say, do you know what percentage of Jewish Americans voted for Barack Obama? 70%. But apparently 70% of Jews in America are not real Jews because they don't agree with the far right-wing ideology of Ben Shapiro.
Exactly.
I'm pretty sure you don't get to say that, okay? And it is deeply offensive.
Now, finally, the grand finale to this entire interview. Let's watch the last video.
The point I'm trying to make is that your words are hardly designed to produce the consensus and understanding that the book seems to want to produce. That's my point, that you write about, Judeo-Christian culture and so on, but so much of what you've said in the past would seem to turn its back on Judeo-Christian culture.
You're lecturing me on Judeo-Christian culture after you call the pro-life position barbaric?
I just asked you a question.
And I asked you a question, you failed to answer a single one of mine. Frankly, I find this whole thing a waste of time. If you want to read the book and critique the book, why don't you read and critique the book? If you want to critique me, you can think whatever you want of me.
Why don't you
frankly,
just try and
I don't care. I don't frankly give a damn what you think of me since I've never heard of you.
And I've never heard of you until I briefed myself for this. But that's not the issue. You have a new book out.
Then why the hell are you interviewing me, sir?
It's an interesting book. But my point is, your book claims that
it'd be nice if you would quote it from time to time.
Your book is, well, actually, I've done so several times, and I'm about to do so again, if you would let me just finish the question. Your book
frankly,
claims
I don't think
that society
honestly,
is turning its back on Judeo-Christian values.
Yeah,
what are those values? What are the values it's turning its back on?
I'm not inclined to continue an interview with a person as badly motivated as you as an interviewer. So I think we're done here. I appreciate your time, sir.
All right, well, thank you for your time and for showing that anger is not part of American political discourse. Now, Mr. Shapiro, we'll say goodbye.
Goodbye.
That was so good.
Goodbye.
That was so good. So Ben Shapiro did tweet about this interview twice, actually. And in one of the tweets, he said, just pre-taped an interview with BBC's Andrew Neil. As I'm not familiar with him or his work, I misinterpreted his antagonism as political leftism. He termed the pro-life position in America barbaric, and that was apparently inaccurate. For that, I apologize. And he also later tweeted that Andrew Neil destroys Ben Shapiro, so that's what it feels like, with a little winky face. And then he said, broke my own rule and wasn't properly prepared. I've addressed every single issue he raised before. See below. Still, it's Neil 1, Shapiro 0.
So that's a good tweet to end it there. It's a little self-offensive.
No. I just know Ben Shapiro too well. Part of his strategy, and he has said this in his book, How to Debate Leftists and Destroy Them, is to concede when it doesn't matter to you. So that false concession is going to appeal to people who go, okay, he got his clock clean, but you know what, he's owning up to it, that's good. But the point is there, that's meant to distract you from that entire clinic that just got hosted right there. Because in that entire video, it showed how he lies, how he smears, how he mischaracterizes people's arguments personally. That comment
and how he can't have an actual conversation with anyone who he doesn't deem to be a leftist, right? That it really is just about random ideology to him, because this is clearly someone who is a conservative who's asking him just honest, regular questions, never use the word barbaric, by the way, and he still isn't prepared for that. So really, he only exists in this figment of, libertarian, right-wing extremist imagination, and in his own, on his YouTube channel. That's it.
And the last thing, he says that I'm not gonna speak with someone as badly motivated as you. That's the argument people make on college campuses when we say, no, we don't want someone who purposely mislabels people as transgender, saying it's a mental illness when the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual says literally the exact opposite. I don't want someone who's perfectly willing to smear on my college campus and won't own up to it. And someone who knows what they're doing. I don't want that. And so the fact that the BBC was able to see through that, BBC was a very neoliberal organization, by the way, but the fact that that conservative was able to see through what college people have been trying to say forever, but Barry Weiss, the New York Times, still doesn't understand, just shows that Ben Shapiro is just a class A grifter and really doesn't understand what he's talking about.
The TYT Plus app is now available on iOS and Android. Download to get more TYT content at tyt.com/app.